Thanks. Let me invite the panelists up. Let's get everyone up here. So thanks for coming, and happy to be here at ET6 again this year. It's been a great event so far, as per usual. We do have a CEO panel here. We have three esteemed CEOs from three pretty notable startups who have, I guess I would call these guys seasoned, although Boaz is pretty young here, but seasoned technology executives who have really attracted venture funding. That's pretty notable. I think, Sapho, you guys just closed a B round last month. Is that correct?
We did.
Yep. So without further ado, let me introduce these guys, and then I'll kind of get into my preamble, and then we'll go into some nice questioning and talk about this space, because it's pretty hot space. It's all about apps. Let's start with that. This is all about apps. It's no longer about these devices. It's about how companies are provisioning apps to users and making that process easier. So without further ado, we have Behnia from PowWow, Fouad ElNaggar from Sapho, and we have Boaz Hecht from SkyGiraffe. Please, you guys, just give a quick intro. I know you guys have seen these guys throughout the day. They've done their pitches, and you've had some great questions. I've sat in on some of those pitches, but why don't you guys quickly introduce yourself? Start with Kia.
Absolutely. Behnia, I'm CEO of PowWow. I've been with PowWow for over a year. Prior to that, I was the CTO for BMC Software for a decade.
Hi, I'm Fouad ElNaggar. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Sapho. I've been doing that for 3 years, and before that, I was the Chief Strategy Officer at CBS, the Interactive Group, and before that, I was a venture capitalist on Sand Hill Road, investing in little companies like ours.
Hi, I'm Boaz Hecht. I'm the CEO of SkyGiraffe. My background, as you can tell, is I'm English, live in the US with a kind of a stop in England, worked for Deloitte in London, then consulting in kind of private equity and venture capital funds, and kind of moved to the Valley 3 years ago. Nice to meet you all.
Excellent. Thanks, guys. So I've been, as you guys know, or you saw my session yesterday, or my introduction yesterday, I track enterprise mobility pretty broadly. Naturally, application development is a big part of that, right? It started with EMM. I think that story is kind of commoditized quite a bit. Some EMM vendors actually have brought in application development into their platforms, which is pretty new. SOTI just announced that this month, in fact, right? So clearly, it's an area where there's a lot of traction in the market, right? Customers want apps. We heard some stats earlier today, right? 10 apps is kind of where companies are at. My firm's data shows a little bit different, particularly when you look at the large enterprise. They have many more apps than 10. And it's scaling, right? This is scaling. That's what you guys are all about. That's your value proposition. So to me, the value proposition is really, these guys are, and apologies for kind of clumping you guys into the same category, but it's fallen into this category that Gartner termed as RMAD, or Rapid Mobile Application Development, if you guys haven't heard this term. That's accurate, right? I mean, that's basically how you describe yourselves. I think you're a little bit different. And I'd like to hear more about that. So let's kind of start with you and tell us how you're a little bit different from a traditional rapid mobile application development approach.
Sure, thank you. We don't think it's all about the apps. We think it's all about the data.
Okay.
So I think from an approach perspective, we built the platform as an enterprise data platform that lets you build, and then we do go to the micro apps, the super apps, the instant app, whatever you want to call them. But the premise is, how do I really kind of connect to data with read and write, where I can kind of initiate workflows according to my kind of a day in the life of my kind of employee day. So if I'm a sales guy, I need to look up customers nearby. And when I look up customers nearby, I need to see kind of my GPS location right now, where my customers are, and maybe going to Salesforce to see their customer details, their shipments in SAP. I need to be able to interact with those different data pieces. And we found, kind of when we were kind of thinking of the platform and what the opportunity was in the market, that the approach has always been the other direction. It's been, how do I kind of mobilize the front end? And we feel like that's somewhat short-termed. It needs to be a future-proof platform that lets me really digitize my business. And that's kind of our approach, which is a little bit different to kind of the other players.
Okay.
But your sign says that you mobilize applications.
Which we do.
And I think that's a core element of the value prop, right? We all have to mobilize applications, right? I mean, that's any platform that's going to participate here, whether you're a platform as a service player, you have to have some sort of app dev capabilities.
Yeah, no, I think the focus on mobility, I mean, we're not really in the RMAD category. We cover a bunch of different categories, but I think the focus on mobility sometimes distracts people from what we're fundamentally trying to do, which is make businesses function better, make people more productive. When we sat down and started really thinking about what we were going to do with Sapho, 4 or 5 years ago, my co-founder, he was the CTO, CIO at CBS, and so we were sitting there brainstorming about the future. We looked at the problems that we were running into around digital business transformation, and the idea that you're going to solve that with mobility only, I mean, I laughed a little bit at the description of the panel. I just don't think is realistic for most of the people here who are making decisions in the room. Yep. When I was a VC, we used to talk about things that were vitamins and things that were painkillers, and there are some good mobility application use cases at companies for people working in oil rigs or people who are insurance adjusters out in the field, but for the most part, when you think about a majority of your employees, a lot of them are spending a lot of their time behind their desk. They're interfacing with email. They're interfacing with messengers like Microsoft Teams or Slack, or they're using their SharePoint. And when you really think about digital business transformation, you've got to figure out how you change workflows, change the way business happens, and get to your employees. Yes, mobile is one piece of it, but it's not the whole piece of it. And so when we started Sapho, we actually took a different approach. These guys definitely kind of came in very mobile heavy at the beginning. Our whole approach was, okay, to deliver what we do, which is a modern portal experience, something that gives your employees a single view into all their systems and lets them access and transact task data and insights on any endpoint. We had to do BPM, we had to do EAI, we had to do legacy portal, we had to do BI, we had to do app server, app dev, and we had to do a little bit of RMAD. And I think as you guys think about how you're going to do digital business transformation, you're going to realize it's not just about taking these applications that you have that are legacy and modernizing them, meaning, oh, I'm going to put it on a mobile app, because who cares, right? If you take an app that nobody's using in the first place and put it onto a mobile device where no one's going to use it either, it doesn't make a difference. It won't actually change the trajectory of your business. And I think, there's another vendor in the RMAD space, and when you look at their results and you look at the churn rate, I mean, these guys are seeing 51% churn rate every year of their customer base, and it would be even higher if they weren't locking you guys down into 2- and 3-year contracts. I mean, it's insane, right? And it's just showing that this is more of a vitamin if you only kind of take that mobile approach. We prefer to take kind of the painkiller approach and go in and say, okay, everybody here has challenges with productivity. Everybody here has challenges with people accessing all of your different systems of record. And that's kind of, our approach. So RMAD's a piece of it, but, it's much broader.
Before you go, Kia, I'm gonna jump in there. So I agree with you, and I think what you just
Good.
described, no, I think you described something pretty interesting, but there's a dichotomy evolving here with what I would describe as where the rubber meets the road with mobile, which is field service, field sales, guys in the warehouse. Those guys need mobile. They have to have mobile. There's mobile mounted on the forklift now, right? Because it's a Windows device on a forklift. So, and it's running mobile apps technically. And I think the mobile element kind of goes away eventually, right? This just becomes RAD, or rapid application development. So with that being said, Kia, kind of jump in here and tell me.
I don't think it's either or. I think the reality is customers, it's a target-rich environment. It's not about mobile, it's about app and app experiences. As more devices come into the enterprise, most of us don't use one device, we use multiple devices.
And multiple platforms.
Right, so, and it's not just about modernizing around just taking the old legacy, perhaps frequently used app that nobody likes, like your expense reports or time cards, and just porting it over to the mobile device. No, it goes beyond that. It's understanding what are the interactions that people have and having a very UX-centric design-first model. And then I completely agree with Boaz that you have to open up the data stores, but you can't do it indiscriminately. There's a security angle that has to be followed. And many of these monolithic, older legacy apps were not designed for open APIs. They open up backdoors. So the 51% number that you gave, and I have a feeling I know who that vendor is because we see them often, half the time they fail the security audit. Yeah, they fail in the security audit part because most businesses are not going to open a back door to their general ledger that goes through the cloud and is open for anybody to come and access. Yeah. And shadow IT might work for 1 or 2 applications, but you're not going to be a strategic solution that has stickiness unless you address security. So it's a
security-
combination of both is my point. It's about the back end and about the front end. It's not about mobile. It's about modern experiences that people can use.
So before you jump in, backend has always been a challenge, right? I mean, if you guys have tracked the space, if your firms have been engaged in trying to mobilize applications and doing things, you know, we saw a whole class of vendors kind of grow up and go away, right? We had this whole MEP sector, right? Mobile Enterprise Application Platforms, Antenna Software, Pixis Mobile. They're gone now. Or arguably, some form of Pixis is still inside of Pegasystems. Despite all that, the problem was with that class of vendor, there's a lot of complexity in getting that middleware to talk to the back end. That problem's gotten a lot easier, right? I mean, how would you describe that? I think that's kind of where the rubber meets the road, and the value prop here is you can connect to these back end systems. And that's what's bringing the power to the end user, is being able to do, you know, indiscriminately getting to different systems, ServiceNow, Concur, all seamlessly, and making that very transparent to the end user. It's really powerful. I mean, this is kind of a new paradigm of the way we work with these different platforms, because you're all using all these disparate SaaS services, right? I mean, that's where people are. Chime in on how you kind of see that evolving, that back end struggle. And I'd like to hear from everyone actually on that topic, because I think that's, you know, I think you don't have trouble getting to the back ends right now.
So I think I guess I want to talk about kind of Fouad's point about the kind of the back-end data with mobile or desktop and kind of the vitamin kind of analogy. I think the employee portal historically has not had a kind of a justified ROI for the business. So SharePoint obviously owns that market. It's a necessary evil, where, you know, obviously I can do approvals for purchase orders and I can do approvals for kind of time off and all that. I don't believe, at least for us, our customers, when they look at the ROI of the platform as a business, the ROI isn't in an approval for a PO or looking up when somebody, you know, joined the company and they've got an employee kind of a snippet. It's a lot more about how do I build, if I have, you know, 50,000 people, I have an app for 1,000 people who are technicians in the field that do need to get a push notification when a new service request is opened in ServiceNow, but then they need to look up where the asset is, and the asset is in IBM Tririga or in or Maximo or whatever that kind of underlying system is. And I feel like, and I agree with you by the way, mobile is not the case. You know, for us we have a desktop and a mobile, so it's very much anything that's accessible needs to be accessible, iOS, Android, and desktop, because I think every user now, as you said, is on all of them. And so anything you build, by definition, needs to be accessible from all three. But on the back-end data component, it's really about orchestration and being able to span on-prem with AD on-prem and single sign-on with Salesforce in the cloud, or no single sign-on with Salesforce in the cloud, and I now have a technician that doesn't have an account for Salesforce. All of those complexities and kind of the nuances is where you kind of need a more robust approach. And I feel like the approach of kind of the screen scraping or kind of the sitting in front of a front end is a limited scope, because you ultimately are going to change that front end. And so just going back onto what you said about security issues with kind of audit trail, how do I really know that the user who did do the approval did the approval in a real way and didn't just get hacked, and actually the browser, kind of the remote desktop access bot just clicked on the wrong place? And so those little things really make a difference, at least to our customers. They want to use the API economy. They want to work with REST. They want to be able to work with, you know, direct to underlying systems or services. But essentially, spanning that and having the access permissioning managed by the right team in the organization and the application management team in the right place, and it's not a system that's kind of sitting on top of it and doing that. And I think that's an important factor.
Absolutely.
I think you got to bifurcate the market a little bit when you talk about, you know, APIs and how easy it is. You know, if you're an SMB, you know, or an SME, and all of your systems are Salesforce and ServiceNow and Zendesk and, you know, all the cloud stuff, that's a very different reality than the ones that we service at Fortune 500
And the
companies.
big company that has
those guys. You know, look, we're at a very large telecom company. They're running Domino systems, and the applications are old enough to order a drink. Okay, she's like, I've been running the same applications here for 25 years, and everyone's like, oh, we're going to rip and replace one day. But the reality is there's so much business logic and there's so much detail that's been invested in these systems. And this API economy that people like to kind of talk about in the press is very different from the realities that we run into at places that are running core applications on AS400s, Z-series mainframes.
And I'd argue that's where screen scraping is valuable, right? Because that's where you're going to want to do that to get those apps or get those applications on mobile devices or anywhere else, right?
And I think, again, it's not an either or. Just because a solution like ours has the ability to transform applications without APIs, that doesn't mean that we don't perform better or just as good if there are APIs. Quite frankly, if you have APIs and interfaces, then the focus is on the front end. And how do you create great experiences, not just one app to one app, but around transforming the business process. But as one CIO who was in our office not too long ago shared with us, the big clothing retailer, they said, we can't hire millennials. And we can't hire millennials not because I don't have $1 billion manufacturing supply chain with software that is 20 years old but working. It's because they can't access the data and use it, especially the generalists, not the specialists, not the people who work on supply chain, but generalists. And again, as I said, the problem constantly becomes a front-end and back-end problem. Any solution that does one and doesn't do the other is an incomplete solution. It forces the customer to go make multiple purchases. We believe part of the failure in this industry has been that people have looked at individual point products and tools rather than evaluating more of a platform approach like you do in cloud. That's why all the cloud vendors have a cloud platform, not cloud tools. Those started and went out of business, just like this market. And it's a broad undertaking. As a startup, you can't do everything. So you're going to partner and be clear on what you don't do. I don't think a lot of the vendors in this space were honest with their clients around what use cases they didn't address.
Okay.
And that's something that we've tried to take in right away and say, these are the use cases that we're really good at. These are the use cases probably that are not, from a business standpoint, make less sense for us, and have a rich ecosystem of other folks that can address those.
Got it. No, that makes sense. I want to shift gears a little bit. So I think the core value proposition of all these guys is the ability to really reduce the time to value in terms of how applications get deployed. You're reducing the overhead in terms of the people you require from a development perspective, right? It's hard to hire developers. Most organizations who have developers, obviously many organizations outsource all of their application development because that's more cost effective. If you're a big enough company to have a sophisticated organization with development, the mobile guys are typically siloed and not really integrated with the broader team, and there are not as many of them typically, right? I think these things are changing, but this concept of citizen developers is an interesting one, right? We heard actually the term used yesterday when we heard about citizen analytics. I think it was the term that was used, which was interesting to me. I hadn't thought of that, right? But in terms of where you guys are and where you play, clearly there's an opportunity for other people than just your IT guys or your developer team, your traditional developer team, to get involved in designing and building really fast, valuable applications, right? That's the kind of micro app concept. And some of these things are pretty basic, right? But basic or simple apps, as SAP calls them, isn't a bad thing, right? I mean, these are valuable productivity-enhancing applications. And I think that's really why I think this space is getting attention and gaining traction, right? I think, would you guys agree? I mean, is that really, I guess what I'm asking is, how do you guys kind of get your foot in the door when you engage with a customer? What hooks them in to say, wow, you know what, we really want to try this and see if we can experiment this and if it works for us?
I'd love to jump in. When I hear the term citizen developer, I kind of say to myself, yuck.
Okay.
I'm not really a big believer.
Salesforce has certainly nailed it, right? Salesforce's whole model is predicated around it. They have so many people developing on that platform.
Well, they're not citizen developers; those are actual developers.
Okay.
The people who are using Force.com are not, random people in an organization. I think, to the point you were making earlier about, the typical person now has a touch because there's so many point solutions in an organization. 32 different systems of record. In a given year.
It's pretty typical.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're already expecting people to be data scientists You're already expecting people, whose job might just be in marketing or HR to be detectives to go figure out where all these things are. And now you're going to go to that person. You're like, oh, and by the way, you're also going to develop your own solutions on top of these systems. I'd find that to be a very fraudulent approach that I don't think is going to get anywhere and really, driving productivity, right? When we go to customers, we bring them case studies showing that our customers triple productivity of their people when they roll out these micro applications. But again, I think one of the challenges is everybody here has developers on staff, right? And really their challenge is about prioritization, right? And where they're going to put those resources, especially if you give them the tools to kind of iterate on these micro applications quickly. The area that we've actually seen people struggling with is more of like a product role that bridges IT to the line of business and going out and figuring out, hey, what's this fundamental unit of work? What's this little micro workflow that needs to be built, right? Because if you're a developer sitting in IT, you don't actually know what that pain is for that line of business user until you actually go out there and do kind of a product function and figure out, hey, how does this work? How does the flow work? Who are the different constituents that are going to touch it? And a lot of times it takes an hour or 2 hours, but it's a skill that we find a lot of people missing. And we got to kind of help, blow on the flame to kind of get it going internally for them to even think differently about how somebody should interface with software. I mean, we've had 30 years of software that's essentially a view on a database where we expect people to go in, do a search list detail and get their information. And now I think the three of us are talking about, hey, guess what? The back ends of these systems of record, we spent 30 years making them awesome so that they can do, two-phase commits and all that stuff magically works. But now we've got to spend some time on the front end piece, which is, hey, is a monolithic system of record front end, along with 31 others, really kind of the best approach, at these places? Yeah. And I think what you're going to need to find is you're going to need to find somebody in the IT department that can be empathetic and go and do this product role. I'm sure you guys see it too. Yeah. To go and really build a new workflow, it requires more than just having, developers, because everybody here has developers on staff.
Yeah, and I think what has been really helpful to our business, we quadrupled over the last year, has been having use cases that are common by industry. So we have, for example, 6 financial services, all with a similar use case around commercial lending. And it involves systems like AFS and PowerLender that have no APIs. So the AFS runs on a mainframe green screen. And being able to take those systems and build effectively adapters that the vendor didn't even have, and then build a modern experience
that's revolutionary.
We did the same thing with airlines. We're doing the same thing now with healthcare, although we're doing that more internationally right now, given all the healthcare debate going on. So I think part of this is customers invite us to be prescriptive, work with them to find out what are the specific secret sauce within their environment, but they want their vendors to be experts, not show up and say, hey, here's how our development tool works, here's how our API works, tell us what you want us to build. Because that clearly over the last 8 years hasn't resulted in any more than 7 apps. Majority of organizations are not that different.
2 of which are emailing calendar.
Yeah, two of which are emailing. I hate to say it. Half of you guys that you think you're different, you're not that different. Some of us vendors need to be open with you to tell you, yes, the versions of the applications might be different, but how you do manufacturing from a system of record, how you do RMA returns, for example, it's pretty similar. If you can whiteboard that with the right person and then do late binding to the systems of record that you have in process, in less than 60 days, 90 days, you can actually have a production quality ready application that the line of business will fund, and then that unlocks the next 10, 15 applications that get rolled out. So,
okay.
So I actually have to say I kind of disagree with both of you. I think when we look at the way we approach customers, and kind of I'm just thinking of kind of the 3 scenarios that we kind of showed, and this is a public forum, so I won't put it on the website, but the ones that you guys saw in the case studies, we ran workshops at customers, kind of Fortune 100, Fortune 200 customers, where they built 15 applications in 2 days. Those 15 applications are identical between the different companies. So they're all opening of tickets, on top of Remedy or on top of ServiceNow or on top of Tririga. They're all looking up inventory on top of SAP or on top of Oracle. They're all doing RMA return. They're doing whatever it is. But I think the 60-day for a production grade type app so that maybe you can then roll it out to production is not a viable, scalable model for these folks today.
Why?
Because the business isn't looking for that. The business is now 70% of business units are going out themselves to buy apps because they can't wait for IT to go, yeah, give me a definition. Okay, so now I'm going to give you a POC. Do a POC, I'll give you a budget, and then we'll do a change request in 6 months' time when I actually need to deliver it. And then iOS 11 came out, and all of that kind of complexity. It's not really a viable way. If I have SAP and I have a dev environment and I have a BAPI that I can build on top of, why can't I connect that BAPI using enterprise connectors, using the API as it is, and being all, AS400 at, it's a public use case, so Packard, the Peterbilt trucks, who connected to AS400 in 3 hours using SkyGiraffe and then built an application that looks up their chassis delivery date. It's something that should be delivered to the business user within a week, and when they deliver it within a week, they then iterate on top of that without bringing in developers, but actually citizen developers. And when I say to citizen developers, I don't want to kind of misrepresent.
Look, if you can deploy something into production at a Fortune 100 company in 2 weeks without going through security, et cetera, hats off to you. In 20 years, again, there are very few companies I can count on one hand that have their SecOps and the deployment teams able to sign off on that.
So I can confirm that that's what we do, but I'm not saying that's the first time we ever met the customer. So what I'm saying is we are able.
Yeah, but I want us to be real with the customers.
Sure.
You got to set realistic expectations.
Okay.
First thing I did when I became the CEO of the company, I tore down our website because we had a slogan, just like Capriza, just like a bunch of people, that said, we're going to do any app in 7 days. And as a CTO, that's not intellectually honest. Because apps are not all equal. Not all apps are equal, and we're talking about Fortune 100 companies.
Right.
This is mission critical data.
So here's
I
a
think
question.
we're also you're missing a point. Where you're talking about replicating a search list detail app on top of an AS400.
Anybody
Guess
can do
what?
that.
We can do that in 1 minute. Who cares,
that's not
right? I think what we're here to talk about today is how do you fundamentally change a business, right? And it's not, oh, yay, another search list detail that somebody's going to use on the phone. It's reinventing a business process, which...
Yeah, absolutely, it's hard. I mean, last year, our case study here was Delta Airlines, where 60 days after they gave us the nod, we boarded a flight. That's not a POC. That's real passengers, real TSA systems. It's a very complicated set of workflows.
Sure.
I just think part of what hurts our industry is vendors that keep touting how easy it is to build apps in a day. Or, I'm sorry, it's just not, that sets expectations and it leads to everybody testing the market for products for failure.
And I disagree with that.
As opposed to being realistic about what it takes to go into production.
But you can build a search list detail app in a day.
Of course, in an hour.
Right?
I mean,
if you're trying to build a search list detail to replicate some crappy desktop app,
exactly.
yeah, it can take 10 minutes.
But that's the point.
Absolutely, but that's not what the customers are trying to do. In the case of Delta, it was 8 different backend systems, 3 of which that don't have APIs, 58 new screens. That's a real app. That's a business
But that's not a super app or a micro app or an instant app, which is the point of the panel. What we're talking about is I want to build an employee directory. I have Exchange, I have SAP HR, I have a BAPI, I can connect it and build an employee directory.
Absolutely.
I can put it in dev, cert, and prod, and roll it out. I'm not saying I'm going to now do a whiteboard, having worked for Deloitte Consult. I kind of understand that process. I'm not saying the whiteboarding session takes 1 hour or 1 day. I'm saying when you define the applications, and the applications are relatively cross-functional across all these companies, if I want to open an instance in ServiceNow, or I want to open an instance in Tririga, or in Remedy, if I have the service, it does take half a day to build it.
Yeah, and my only point is that's not digital transformation. That's a nice mobile little widget.
It's incremental.
It's a vitamin.
Corporate directories are not going to transform a business. Nobody's going to compete with another company on how their employees look up their phone numbers. I'm sorry. It's a good mobile app use case.
Completely agree.
We could talk about that during the M6 and M3 time, but this is ET6. This is today. People are in competition. If they don't, if majority of our customers are looking across at other people in their industry and saying, how can I get there faster? And faster doesn't mean a day. It means faster with safety, without violating regulations and all the other pieces that I need.
I think one of the challenges here is, I'm not sure people have kind of the same definition of what a micro application is, right? And when you actually look back at the history of applications, application is a program that's supposed to help somebody achieve an activity, right? To do an activity. And when we think about micro apps, we think about unbundling these monolithic applications into these little components where people can get work done. When you talk about building a directory, I mean, that to me is a capital A application. And what I think the world is moving towards is, micro applications, right?
Like
Simple,
what?
single purpose
Like
things.
what?
Here's a great one that we see a lot at customers. So, workflows that involve touching multiple systems, like onboarding or sales, right? So a salesperson wants to understand that a ticket's been closed at his customer. How many times does a salesperson log into a ServiceNow? I'm going to tell you the answer: never. Never, because it's not their system of record. And so what happens at an organization? That salesperson sends 50 emails to somebody in IT saying, hey, is this closed, is this closed, is this closed, is this closed? A micro application to me is when that ticket for his customer is closed, he gets a notification on Microsoft Teams, on IBM Connections, on SharePoint, on Outlook Actionable Messages that says, this ticket is closed. It pulls a customer email right out of Salesforce, and he can push a button,
that's
auto
super
pop an
I
email.
agree. Super
That to
valuable.
me is a micro application,
And
right?
valuable, and a valuable one.
And I agree with that, but I guess I
But you
don't see
just,
the
but you
complexity
just,
of it.
but you just
But
talked
I don't
about
see
building
the-
a directory.
So I don't see the complexity of having a push notification that tells me that a ticket has been closed. Like I agree
You
with
got to
you.
finish the workflow. The ticket is closed.
Yeah.
Here's the customer. Click an
But that's
email.
one
Finish the
feature
work.
of what SkyGiraffe does. Like that's not even like a full that you don't.
No, but this
being
is
able
this
to
is
get
this is the
webhook-
differentiation in what we're talking about. You're talking about building mobile applications. We're talking, and I'm
But there's
talking
no
about.
action. There's no right.
There
there's
is an
no-
action, sending
what's
an
the
email
action?
to the customer.
With an email I have in my email. I have mail on my client. That's
Th-
the app that
This
everybody's
is the
rolled
exact
out.
problem
these are
that people
alternate
have.
channels, I think is
This is
the
the
way I
same
look at
problem
it.
that people have today. When you've got to alt tab in between different systems to go do
Wait
your
a second,
work.
wait a second. The value proposition that you're saying is that Sapho is able to take a ServiceNow incident associated to a Salesforce customer and send me as a sales guy a push notification that it was closed, so I can email the customer.
Not just a push notification. It can hit them on any channel that they're working
Whatever,
on.
like they can go through Skype Teams or Slack or whatever, but essentially the flow is that I am getting a push notification, a text message that says it's being closed, so I can email the customer.
Right there in one workflow.
Excellent.
Which
What
is
about if
valuable.
I'm-
I think that's
which-
valuable.
Which I'm
Yeah.
not saying isn't valuable.
And by
but
the
then-
way, there's 10,000 little micro applications like that,
Absolutely,
which are
and I
different than
completely
building
agree.
a company directory on a mobile phone.
Completely agree, and approval of POs and approval of PTOs and be able to do all of that stuff. My question on that though is, when we see kind of a Fortune 40 company that has 4,000 salespeople in North America, when they walk into a customer, they walk into 10 a day, let's say, they go into 10 meetings a day, they need to do a customer 360. Now, when I do a customer 360, great, so I saw the ticket was closed. What about the other 3 tickets that are still open? Am I walking into a customer going, oh, I didn't get a push notification today, so I don't know what tickets are open?
Well, you
Is that
know,
kind
you,
of
you
a-
know it hasn't been closed yet, right? Because you haven't gotten a notification.
Did I
right?
get a
Have you heard of
notification that
this
it was
concept
opened?
of automation
Did I get a
that's coming to the
notification
world?
it was
But I
open?
think this is where I agree the definitions on the class applications help separate this, because
Yes.
as you need to take more advanced functions, like taking action on things, we would argue that that's what a super app would be, which would be different than a micro app. Again, I completely believe there's going to be lots of micro apps that are little tidbits. Approvals is a good example. I don't want to go into 16 different backend systems and approve unless I see something I don't know, in which case I want to actually see the details.
And you'll be waiting
Right.
a long time
And-
for SAP
But
or
as an
Oracle to
enterprise,
bring you
I'm
that.
not going to now buy a platform that lets me do just push notifications that have a little bit more information in them, and then deploy them, and then build them, and all it
I'm
does
not
is
in a
one
place.
aspect.
I'm not in a place to tell enterprises what they're going to buy or not buy. I'm just going to look at the use cases that they come to us with, and there's plenty of use cases. I'm getting alerted on my watch during the session on all the tweets that are happening. It's a very good forum on Twitter. There's a place for a micro app that
Yeah.
notifies me just on that. I'm
I
glad
completely
that it
agree.
exists.
I'm just saying, at least from what we're seeing when we speak to a customer, the first app that they want is an approval and an employee directory and be able to look up my
But
you know, whatever
approval
it is.
could be a micro
Super
app
easy.
that is notified based, and
Absolutely.
it could be a super app that. So we're
the
not
next step?
arguing. This is
But what's
almost
the next
style
step?
points.
We are going to take
Sure.
a question. We've
Yes,
had a
thank
great
you.
discussion, but let's take a question and get some audience participation here. We still got plenty of time left, too.
Can't see.
Can we get Mike? There we go.
Thank you. Isaac Sokolic from Star CIO. So you guys can debate user experience and what's digital transformation and what's not, and what's a micro app and what's a super app. But you're all in the business of improving developer productivity in some form, whether you're doing it with low code or citizen developer.
Yep.
Doesn't really matter, right? Because I can do everything you're doing in Java or .NET or
Yep.
any other low-level language. And what you're really saying is, do it in my platform because I'm going to give you better productivity.
Reduce
And maybe
cost.
a better experience. How do you define better productivity? Why should I give this to you to develop on your platform? And how are you going to prevent being the next Powerbase or the next Lotus? I got 20 apps built on your platform 20 years from now that can
So
drink the Kool-Aid.
I'll take the first cut at that. So I think the metrics that we see for a development organization is different than from the line of business. I'll share both. On the development side, it's the speed and cost. Basically, what's the gas mileage on your platform in terms of how many, both number of apps and how much time you can spend on design versus rebuilding the same code across different IDEs. We are in a multi-platform world. We have been for a long time. And what we find is majority of development teams are rewriting the same exact code across tablets, phones, different operating systems. And that's just money that you never get back once you go down that level. On the business side, not all apps are equal. And this was my whole point, is it doesn't matter whether it's a micro app or a super app. It matters whether passengers safely get on their flights, commercial loans get made. That's the metrics that each line of business looks at. And speed to market is huge, right? Especially on applications that make you money. And then the second question around how we're not going to be Powerbase, this is actually one of the things that attracted me to PowWow. We have put together an enterprise class architecture made out of components that are open. So AngularJS, if you don't like it, you can swap out the UI framework, Ionics, and Cordova. Our IP, and we have a big patent around the transformation area. That's our secret sauce. But in terms of what UI frameworks and what runtime frameworks we use, we've adopted a very open architecture from that standpoint.
On the ROI question, on the developer stuff, I mean, that's pretty motherhood and apple pie. It's going to be the same metrics for everybody. For us, the way we sell and we go in through CIOs, it's really around business value that's created. And we track that through productivity. The metric that we look at, we have a couple that are super important to us. One is time from event to action. So the way our system works is we're watching for events, changes in your underlying system of record that then triggers a workflow. And typically at companies, a lot of stuff gets bogged down, right? People get an email saying something's ready for them, and they're like, yeah, I'll do it later. And so, for the people that sat in one of our case studies, we showed one customer whose salespeople, they were picking leads up 5 weeks after they came into the system, after we built, a micro app platform and built them kind of a sales portal. The time to action off of that lead dropped to 1.5 days from 5 weeks. And of course, what happens when you're touching leads in 1.5 days instead of 5 weeks? Well, all of a sudden sales goes up, right? And so we look at kind of the time from event to action. If we can compress that, usually business value that's measurable pops out of that. The other thing that we look at, is tickets. So one of our theses is that, again, if you're touching 32 different systems a year as an end user, you're probably, an expert on 2 of them. And the other, 29 are ones where you forget your password. They're ones where you forget how it works. There's one where the training was 2 years ago. And that ends up generating a bulk of tickets for IT, these people who are, non-core users. And so the other thing that we track, with our customers is the decrease in help desk tickets, which are expensive. It's $25 to $50 per call. If you can unbundle workflows and make it easier for people to do their work without having to remember how to log into a system, without having to remember how to use a system. There's tremendous value in that. And then the last metric that we track, to kind of show, hey, this is the cat's pajamas, is engagement. And this is kind of from my consumer days, at CBS. We were very big into measuring engagement in the form of, it's called DAU/MAU, daily active users over monthly active users. So in your population of people, who come to your product in a given month, how many are using it every day? If you can get to a ratio over 0.6, that's Facebook territory. And for every one of our customers, they're sitting at a DAU/MAU greater than 0.7, because when you build a portal that's good, that brings work to people and makes them, easier to do their job and hit their goals and get their bonuses, they become addicted to it, just like people are addicted to Facebook, and they just come in there and push their buttons. So, those are the things, that we track, that we use to do kind of our ROI calculator, the things that we look at when we do business value assessments with big customers.
So I guess we think about it more as a kind of how do you build a sustainable business that's a long-term player. So when we were analyzing kind of the way the market has evolved kind of 5 years ago before we started the company, we looked at the antennas and the accelerators and the kind of, at the time, Capriza and kind of the screen scraping, the remote, all of the, so the VDI, whatever processes, we say, okay, well, at some point there's a limit that you're not building a future-proof business. You're not building a company, a sustainable company that an enterprise can standardize on. And so we said, in order to actually build that, we need to build a system that would effectively be the system of engagement across systems of record. So I love the kind of the 32 applications that people are interacting with, because they need to obviously go across them. But from an approach to a customer, it's much more about saying that pretty much 80% of our use cases go across all of our customers. So you don't need to reinvent the use case. Like I'm a little bit less focused on I guess the transforming of an existing application that I now have and I need to now access on the mobile, and so I think that's a limited scope of a business, and I think for us, when our customers kind of sign up, they sign up as a customer for whatever 1,000 users, and they build 25 apps and 1,000 users, and then they keep building more apps. But the apps just go across different business units, and the different business units come up with more functionality, but they are standardizing on a platform. It's not a temporary solution for a specific existing application, and it's not for a subset of the functions. You need a system that will grow with the business and will actually add value as a single pane of glass across my backend systems, whether it's mobile, desktop, and the whole RAD thing, the Rapid Application Development Rapid Application Platform, whatever it is.
Yep.
I think that's the future of where things are going. And Salesforce is trying to do it with Lightning Connect and Salesforce One, and Dell is trying to do it with Dell Boomi and buying Manyhoo, and Microsoft has Microsoft Power Apps and Microsoft Integration Services. Yep. And so I feel like that's a real business, and we're going in that way rather than saying we are a kind of a subset of that as a portal or as a whatever it is.
But wait, how do you measure value for your customers? I didn't catch that.
There's ROI per app. So it depends on the application. So if it's an application that I'm able to calculate infractions and notify a vendor of infractions, then I have an ROI that's specific to that. And I can see how many times the person logged in and how many people logged in and who logged in, all of the, obviously, different things. But it depends on the application.
Let's get some more questions in, because I think we have some good, smart people out here who want to ask. Yeah, please.
Both the vendor side and IT. If you can show me a product manager that can define a process in 1 to 2 hours, that person is Jesus Christ, and they deserve to walk on water. Because I've never seen anyone do that in the last 2 decades, especially for having worked at a large $5 billion company trying to transform processes. So the theories about what people are talking about are interesting. I do see the extension to mobile where it makes sense. But the part that's interesting for me is the number I talked about earlier. 84% of digital transformation efforts are failing, and it's not Dell Boomi that's powering it, or even Salesforce to some expectations. They do it to a point. They've oversold that you can spend 100, save 500. In the end, it doesn't ever turn out that way. So the question is, when you're talking to these customers that are trying to transform their company, how are you helping them scale? Because most of them today that I've talked to that have succeeded, like the NFL, Gavilon Group, different ones, ExamSoft, they are using open source and building it themselves because they're tired of being sold a bag of goods. So explain to me how your platform is going to change it or make it different, beyond, to your point, you're talking business process, you're talking extended mobile, which makes sense to me. You're talking kind of business process, kind of quasi somewhere in between.
So we feel it's one stack. So I guess we run a work, we come into the customer, you have a team from Siebel, so you have a business analyst and the Siebel developer, as an example. You have the SAP team who has a business analyst and an SAP developer who knows how to configure BAPIs, and it takes them however many days it does. And you have an Oracle team and another Oracle team and another Oracle team, and then you have whatever the Salesforce admin and the Salesforce developer. And you bring them in, and each of those, historically, at least as far as we've seen, have already been asked by the business for the last 2 years for at least 5 scenarios that they've been asked to have access outside of what is existing today. Whether it's the Siebel sales, the guy who's the developer for Siebel, he needs a web service that allows you to look up customers nearby. He has the GPS coordinates, he has the customer lookup, he has that service already. Now what he wants to do is have a mobile app that lets me say where I am, put it in as a parameter, and be able to see my customers nearby. I'm not saying this is, and I appreciate the kind of the idea of kind of a business transformation at the CIO, CEO level. I'm talking about business transformation in the functional business units who have been hungry for actual functionality for the last 3 years when they got iPhones, or 4 years ago when they got iPhones, and they still have less functionality on them than the BlackBerry. And that's really where it's at. And if you can give the business an app that lets them do Customer 360 or customers nearby within 2 days, that adds value to the business. It's not rocket science.
You bring up a great point, right? And this was kind of what I was talking about earlier when we were talking about developer constraints, and I said the real constraint is actually in this product role, right? The person that's going to go out there. And where we've seen success is when you have somebody that's really dedicated to, at the CIO level to digital business transformation, and they staff it with a VP of end user experience or a VP of innovation, and that person is kind of the captain who's making sure that these groups coordinate. What we do is we help them, again, we go in and help them get the first 1 or 2 going so they can see how you go and collect that data and how you build that process. But if you're going into a place that doesn't have kind of, the right mindset or the preparedness to staff that role, it will never work. Because if you're counting on an engineer who doesn't know the people at HR or doesn't know the people at FP&A to go and coordinate those things, it will be impossible. And we leave accounts where we don't see kind of the right infrastructure in place to be successful, because I agree, it will be unsuccessful 99 times out of 100 if you don't have somebody in there who can go in and say, okay, where are things breaking down in this flow?
Yeah, and we do the same. The only thing I would add to the other speakers was that we do look for business value and the business case early on, because it really tests, is this just technology for tech? Again, we assume every enterprise is a target-rich environment, so it's not about can you mobilize, it's are you mobilizing the right set of workflows? And we're probably more biased a little bit towards, is this making you money or saving you money? Is the savings and the revenue clear? If they're not, I don't think most organizations have the budget to go modernize their backend APIs for the next decade. I mean, there's some fortunate companies that have that, but majority of them have a backlog of applications, and we take that backlog, run it through a screen to say, okay, where in the quadrant does it show up? Flex is a great example. With Michael's team, we took 4 applications during the proof of concept. One was one that Capriza had done that wasn't getting a lot of adoption. We did the pound for pound comparison that were faster and more agile. We took Bond, which nobody had mobilized because Bond's no longer around, and it's a Windows app. We took a Java application. So once we showed all 4 of them, then you become a strategic platform because you demonstrate that you can address multiple use cases. But there had to be a business case. There had to be a line of business person breaking down the door saying, I want this, as opposed to, no disrespect, but a bunch of technologies and developers that get excited about new development tools.
Quick question on the kind of when you say strategic. So I really agree that strategic platform. I think it's important as a company to kind of say, are you innovative? Are you a future platform, or are you a legacy extender?
Yeah.
And I feel like the
as a
examples that
stopgap.
so as a stopgap.
Yeah.
And I feel like the examples you gave of all, it's a system that doesn't exist anymore, or it's a Windows 32 application, or it's whatever it is.
No, that's
and
one of the apps.
Sure, and I appreciate that, and kind of the one from Delta, same thing, or the
It's
insurance
not the same
companies
thing.
that don't.
No, Delta has half of their APIs are RESTful APIs that you and I use on their public website. The other systems that are very critical for passenger information are not modernized. It would take them 3 years
Absolutely,
to
it'll take them
modernize it.
3 years. So what I'm asking is, in 3 years' time, do you exist as a company, or are you effectively a stopgap in the
No,
3
but-
years to say, because saying strategic is important.
So what you're mistaking is in every history of software, companies start out as features, then they become products, and they become platforms.
Okay.
PowWow and Capriza 4 years ago invented app transformation as a feature.
Sure.
For us, it's a feature of our platform, and our platform is very rich. Like I said, if they're RESTful APIs, if they're modern APIs, we'll consume as do you, as does Sapho. There's no differentiation on that. We
I
also
would say
have
there
a
is, by the
ton
way,
of.
but okay.
Well, that's great. That's and again, this market is not about one solution. It's about how do you solve the problems. And I think the UI side of the house for us and the experience side is equally important.
Sure, I agree with
Because
that.
nobody calls that I know of, you never get a call saying, I loved your API, it was fantastic. If your UI sucks, the app doesn't get used.
Sure.
Period. End of story. And
Yeah, I agree.
a lot of the usage problems that we've had was because of people not having UX design, core design principles, and just opening up the back end, hoping that they'll build it and they'll come.
Sure, and I agree with the native, and obviously we believe that HTML5, obviously the user experience is obviously from an investment perspective, it's better, but from we believe in native development with 3D Touch and Touch ID and push and all of the different kind of values of kind of native.
But UX is not UI. Again, I want to
right.
keep going back. UX is not
I
UI.
also, one last point, just to close out. I do think you create kind of a false equivalency between legacy extenders and the future.
Yeah.
There's this great platform called Uber, okay? And 20 years from now, Uber's gonna have automated cars with no drivers, and it's gonna come pick me up and take me everywhere. But guess what? They had to extend the taxi model first with people that drive those cars around while they invest to get there. So
Sure, I think that's a bit presumptuous, but okay.
going to companies that have real problems with legacy systems that do want to invest in the future. They need to solve an acute problem today. Thinking about 20 years from now is great. And I think everyone gets there, right? You kind of extend, and then, hey, it's tomorrow, and you've got a platform that works. But, I don't think it's either or. I think, most of the people in this room have systems that they've had for 20 plus years, and they have to be functional. They're not gonna, we live in Silicon Valley, so everyone's like, oh, rip and replace. We're gonna go on to Meteor.js, and I'm gonna move everything to Docker containers. The reality is that's just not the world that most of these people live in. And if you don't help them solve that problem as a bridge to the future, then I think that you will fail as a company. Thank you.
As you say, we're out of time. This has been a great, lively discussion. Phil, I know you're anxious to move us along here.
No, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Maybe we'll sit
'cause
down at dinner and we'll have
I think we could
these
go
guys
on,
at
and
my
I'm
table.
really sorry that I know there were more questions, but these gentlemen would love to answer your questions in the one-on-one room.
There you
So
go.
thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Thanks,
Great
everyone.
job.
Excellent job.
Thanks, guys.
So that